Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. The next chapter is Washington, D.C., and John Rainbird has been instructed to kill Dr. Wanless. So Cap had said to Dr. Wanless, I'm interested in what you're saying and I want to hear more, and be at this hotel, stay there in case I need to reach you. So Wanless does. He doesn't understand that Rainbird has been sent in to assassinate him. Quote, John Rainbird was a man at peace. He was at peace with almost everything. Cap, the shop, the United States. He was at peace with God, Satan, and the universe. Page 130. So we find out that he has 3 interests in life. Shoes, which he continually buys and kind of displays at his home in Arizona, and he doesn't wear them really. He wears crappy old shoes, but he likes to have his array of shoes to look at as a collection. The second thing is death. He is very interested in what happens to a person as they die. He wants to understand death. It's like a big mystery to him, and he continually looks for answers when he assassinates people. And third is Charlie. He is very interested in Charlie McGee. Cap doesn't realize the extent of Rainbird's knowledge when it comes to the McGees. He has read all the files. He has done a whole bunch of investigating of his own into this case, this top secret case. And if Cap had known all this, he probably would have killed John Rainbird, because all the stuff that he is reading is above his classification level. Quote, as far as Cap knew, John Rainbird had only the vaguest knowledge of the McGees and none at all of Lot 6. Actually, Rainbird knew almost as much as Cap himself, something that surely would have marked him for extreme sanction if Cap had known. Page 131. So at some predetermined time, Rainbird slips into Wanless's hotel room, quietly gets by the bed and reaches down and starts smothering Wanless with his hand. Wanless freaks out, as you do when your breathing is compromised, and Rainbird says, hey, I will let you live, but I need you to tell me stuff. And Wanless agrees. So Rainbird says, I want you to tell me everything about Charlene McGee, which is Charlie. So Wanless starts going through his, normal spiel, all the warnings, all the Lot 6 stuff. He just spills it all because he wants to live. And afterward, of course, Rainbird kills him anyway. And even with Wanless, Rainbird is disappointed in his death because it's just not anything but a look of confusion, basically. That's usually what happens when a person dies. The light is extinguished from their eyes and they just look confused. There's no magical sign, there's no knowledge that Rainbird ever gets, but he is convinced that Charlie will be different, and he wants to be the one to kill Charlie. The next chapter is Tashmore, Vermont. Charlie and Andy have made it to Granzer's cabin, and it's deserted, wintertime. It's mostly a summer camp type situation where you have people who summer there. There are a few people who live there year-round, but mostly it's just summer cabins. They settle in, they have some supplies there, they get, hunkered down. When Charlie goes to sleep, Andy goes out to the porch and he starts reminiscing. He starts thinking about the day that Vicky was killed. So this was back in 1980, and he had a terrible hunch, which he had occasionally gotten hunches ever since the Lot 6 experiment, and they were usually accurate. So he was at work, he had this terrible feeling that something was wrong, so he booked it home as fast as he could. He eventually makes it downstairs. Quote, he opened the door between the washer and the dryer, and the ironing board whistled down with a ratchet and a crash, and there beneath it, her legs tied up so that her knees were just below her chin, her eyes open and glazed and dead, was Vicky Tomlinson McGee, with a cleaning rag stuffed in her mouth. Page 152. Her neck had been broken, several of her fingernails had been pulled off, and he was just horrified. I can imagine. So what Andy is able to figure out is that Charlie had gone to a friend's house, and they must have been under surveillance when Charlie didn't appear at her normal spots in her home. She wasn't in her home for a few days. The people who were surveilling their house got panicked and thought that maybe the McGees had finally gotten tipped off and had hidden Charlie and were going to make a break for it and run away. Well, she was just staying in a friend's house. So all of this was a complete overreaction to a situation. And Andy collects himself, sits with Vicky, mourns her for a little bit, but then he realizes that Charlie is now the most important thing because Charlie is likely still alive. So he calls the friend's house where she was staying. And now keep in mind that these kids are really little. The mother of this child had let Charlie go off with two of Andy's supposed friends. So she's like, oh, your friends came and picked her up. Was that not okay? You know? And Andy's like, fuck, this is bad. But he doesn't want to alarm the woman. So he's like, well, ask the kid, you know, what they were driving. Were they driving a car or a van? I need to catch up with them. You know, he's just playing along as though it was okay. Finds out it was a gray van. He goes out and he starts trying to kind of trail them. He sees some kids playing outside. He pushes them with his mind, trying to get information out of them if they saw this van or not. He goes to a car wash and he's like, hey, did a van pass by here? You know, he just has all these little ways of trying to reconstruct the path that they might have taken. And he ends up chasing them down to a rest area. And, you know, he has the advantage because he should have been at work for a lot longer, but he came home early. So they weren't even expecting him to notice that Charlie was gone yet at this point, or even to have found Vicky yet. So he catches up with them, they draw their guns, and it's two agents holding Charlie, and then a whole bunch of bystanders at this rest area. And Andy uses his power, and he convinces one of them that his gun is too hot to hold, so the guy drops his gun. And then he puts one of the guys to sleep, and then the other one, he says, you're blind now, and the guy can't see. Like, he believes he's blind. He's bumping into things. It's really intense because the guy is so angry about it. And then Andy, who's already stressed and he has pushed himself really hard with his mental powers, he has to go around to all the bystanders and give them a little seed to make them think that all of this is just natural and nothing really happened of note. So he has to convince all these people that everything's okay, and then he has to take Charlie and go away and hope that no one else enters the scene so that he doesn't have to keep giving little stories to people. And he is just wiped out. This has taken so much out of him. He and Charlie flee, they go to a hotel and they stay there, and Andy recovers a little bit. So that is the story of how Charlie's mom died and how the shop briefly had Charlie and Andy was able to get her, and then they just started running. They've managed to stay in a few spots for a little while, but then they always have to keep moving. So now that Andy and Charlie are at the cabin, it's wintertime, they just kind of hunker down, they're going to be there until spring. Andy gets all of their supplies by crossing the pond to the other side, which he's in Vermont. The other side of the pond is New Hampshire. So he uses the ice, walks across it, does all their grocery shopping, all that stuff. Never brings Charlie. She always stays hidden. So all of this boils down to a question of Charlie's safety. For, you know, her immediate safety and for her future safety, because if anything happens to Andy, what is going to become of Charlie? You know, he has to think about this stuff, and he has decided that the best course of action is to write letters to people. So he writes 6 letters, and he takes them across the pond to mail them. 3 of them are to government people, so like his U.S. representative and the senators from his state, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Toledo Blade, because remember they're from Ohio. There's a man who watches Andy mail his letters, and as soon as Andy does, he calls Virginia and reports him to the shop. So you think that Andy is in the clear with these letters, explaining everything, and then he is not. So one of the agents that we've already met, the really bad one, OJ, who I don't know if I've said it, but his real name is Orville Jameson. He and another agent hold up the mail carrier who has Andy's letters, and they take them and send them away to Virginia. So the poor mailman gets robbed, and Andy's letters never get sent to where they're supposed to go. Next chapter is Cap and Rainbird. So Cap is sitting in his office, and he is at this point where he thinks that his job is very much on the line. He doesn't think that he is going to be with the shop much longer unless he starts producing results. There have just been too many messed up things. The Lot 6/McGee case is really going to be unfavorable if it's released to the public, and they can't justify holding on to Cap if he's not going to start pulling his weight. Cap is reading the letters from Andy. Basically, the shop knew that the McGees were staying at Granther's cabin within days of them actually getting there. They just, they pieced it together from family history, from, logically where he would be able to travel and escape the roadblocks that have been put up, all that stuff. Quote, he had now come to believe that if they were going to have any real control over her, they would need her father as well, page 189. So they know that Andy has to be part of the package. Originally, he was slated to just be killed, and then they would take Charlie, and, that was that. Now they have realized that they need Andy as a tool and as a little bargaining chip. So Cap calls Rainbird in. He's going to give him instructions on what to do to capture them. And Rainbird starts making demands. And he's like, I know a whole bunch of stuff, and I have been squirreling away other information about missions, about things that are not above board, and I could just come out with that stuff if you don't give me what I want. And there's a really good passage. Quote, Cap sat and looked at Rainbird. His mind had divided, it seemed, had become a three-ring circus. Part of it was marveling that he had never heard John Rainbird say so much at one time. Part of it was trying to grapple with the idea that this maniac knew all of the shop's business. A third part was remembering a Chinese curse, a curse that sounded deceptively pleasant until you sat down and really thought about it. May you live in interesting times. For the last year and a half, he had lived in extremely interesting times. He felt that just one more interesting thing would drive him totally insane. Page 195. And how many of us can relate to that right now? So Rainbird wants to have access to Charlie. He wants to pick her apart. He wants to get knowledge from her and observe her power, and then he wants to be the one to kill her. That is his end goal. And Cap finally agrees. So they strike a deal that this will happen, and that after Rainbird gets what he wants, Cap and Rainbird will go out to Rainbird's house and burn all the incriminating documents, and they will be even. Next chapter is In the Box. Andy fears that his letters did not make it to their destination, so he has decided that it's time for him to get out of the cabin, get Charlie away, go to the actual New York Times office and talk to someone. So they are ready to leave. They quickly pack and they step out the door, and they're both tranquilized. So they are both shot and tranquilized and carried away. And then our final chapter for today is the Blackout. So this is 5 months later. Now we're in August, and Charlie and Andy are both being held at the shop facility. They're both being drugged. Neither one is cooperative. So Andy isn't pushing people, Charlie isn't starting fires. And it's basically just 5 months of them hanging out, not complying, just existing. And Andy has turned into a very drug-dependent, just unmotivated, really happy to just escape in his TV watching and his drug-induced stupor. Rainbird has decided to infiltrate Charlie's world by pretending to be a custodial person, and he wears an eye patch. Before, he hadn't ever worn an eye patch because he didn't care that he was missing an eye, but for Charlie's benefit, he puts an eye patch on. He goes and he cleans her quarters, and he occasionally tries to draw her out of her shell, but she doesn't ever take the bait. So a huge storm rolls in and knocks the power out, and the primary power goes out, and then the generator overloads and dies, and there's a huge length of time where this blackout occurs. And Rainbird happens to be in Charlie's quarters with her, which is perfect because he pretends he's afraid of the dark. He pretends he is just terrified and unable to function. She goes over and comforts him. They start sharing secrets. He was in Vietnam. He did lose his eye, but he also makes up stories and tells her that he was captured. He was thrown into a hole. He was tortured for months and wouldn't comply with them. Well, I mean, it's not that he wouldn't comply, he also didn't have the information. All this stuff was made up. But he says he didn't have the information and they kept trying to get the information out of him. He's basically making a little parallel story to Charlie's current situation because they want her to light fires, they want her to do all this stuff, and then she'll be able to see her dad again. And he's just using that as like a little bonding inroad thing. And she falls for it. She is grateful to have a friend. She spills all this stuff to him, and you know, they start doing the whole us against them thing, you know, and Rainbird just really, that blackout was perfect for him. He's able to get his claws in really deep, and he promises that he will get a letter to her dad. He'll slip him a letter. So he's just making all these inroads with Charlie, and all it took was this blackout. Andy at first during this blackout is just terrified. He is just about ready to have had his pill. He's on Thorazine and he is just useless and scared and upset. He ends up falling asleep and he actually self-pushes. So he tells himself, he basically cures his drug addiction instantly in a dream. He just gets rid of it. And he had always been afraid to try to push himself. And I think he was afraid he would cause an echo and it would just go on and be a bad thing, but it worked out fine, and now he is completely free of his drug dependency, and it's really cool. But now he has that whole, I have to act like I'm drugged and I have to pretend to be the same person even though I'm not. So now he has renewed hope, and he is gonna hopefully be able to get Charlie out of the situation she's in. And you know, it's funny because when he and Charlie were on the run making money, he used to give like classes to businessmen to give them confidence, to boost them up, to help them get raises, and he also used to run a Weight Watchers type program where he would help people lose weight by, you know, giving them a push. And you know, he's like, hey, this whole time I could have been, you know, curing drug addicts as well. And so, yep, that's where we will leave it today.